it struck me because as someone who's friends with a lot of Protestant, a lot of like my Baptist friends, and these are things that you don't think of. I don't think about that, but I hear them talking like that all the time. That they've got this, I'm washed in the blood. I'm once saved, always saved. You don't have to do anything. You're just saved by what Jesus' work on the cross. But of course, that's a very shallow understanding. And this is what you always, and this is the feeling that I get from spending time with people who aren't Catholic, from people of other Christian like denominations, is that it's just like the bare outline of what it means to be a Christian. So they've got some elements of it, and it's not to knock their sincerity or anything like that, but it really is Catholic light. It really is Christianity light and if only they would open themselves up to the fact that there's so much more goodness, truth, and beauty if they embrace the fullness of truth in the Catholic Church.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
Both not at home, but recording still, responding to recent news. Mark, Kemi Badenoch was interviewed and she explained that her belief in God was extinguished after finding out about the details of the Joseph Fritzl case, which is an awful case. It's horrific, isn't it? If people don't know the details of that case, maybe you want to just run through how horrific that was before we get on to your fantastic article dealing with the problem of suffering, really.
Thank you. Okay. Well, perhaps it might be a good idea if I just shared the Telegraph article. It is linked in the thing, but basically it really caught my attention because it sort of was a bit of a smack in the face, I don't know, and a very facile rejection of faith that she gave. It was in a BBC interview, and she basically says that the behaviour of this man, Joseph Fritzell in Austria, who kept his daughter captive for 24 years. I mean, it's an absolutely terrible story, as you say. And that was what led her to sort of abandon her faith. And I think this is an extremely Protestant, this is really important because it's the difference really between Protestantism, or the problem with Protestantism, and the problem with, and the benefit of Catholicism in a nutshell, if you like. I've got that up on I haven't even got that. So this is the, I thought I had it up on the thing. Shows how together
We're doing
I am.
well, aren't we?
So this is the article in the Telegraph. And if we go to, so basically this is the guy who was engaged in incest. He looks healthy, doesn't he? And Elisabeth, his daughter, was kept as a slave in a purpose-built dungeon by her father, who fathered 7 children with her. And basically the bit that Kemi pointed out, okay, so if for perhaps our American audience, Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the Conservative Party, who are at the moment, just from a political point of view, in disastrous position, being out conservative by basically everyone. So our political situation is a disaster. And God love her, she's trying hard. There's lots of promising signs, but she just hasn't quite got that commitment. Article, she's talking about the fact that she still, it's this, what Gavin calls therapeutic deism, isn't it? It's this idea that, Christianity is really good. It's really good for society and for our culture. But I don't actually believe in God. And that's really the sort of the position that comes across in that article, which I think is extremely dangerous. And I think that, perhaps it's summed up by the idea, and this is a quote from David Anders that I put in my article on Catholic Unscripted, that in my experience, when I was Protestant, I learned that Christ suffered so I wouldn't have to. And that when I became Catholic, I learned that Christ suffered so that I would learn how to. I thought that was a fantastic summing up of the difference between the two faiths. It just shows the divergence really between the Catholic faith and Protestantism. And it struck me because, as someone who's friends with a lot of Protestant, a lot of, like, my Baptist friends, and these are things that you don't think of. I don't think about that, but I hear them talking like that all the time. That they've got this, I'm washed in the blood. I'm once saved, always saved. You don't have to do anything. You're just saved by what Jesus' work on the cross. But of course, that's a very shallow understanding. And this is what you always, and this is the feeling that I get from spending time with people who aren't Catholic, from people of other Christian denominations, is that it's just like the bare outline of what it means to be a Christian. So they've got some elements of it, and it's not to knock their sincerity or anything like that, but it really is Catholic light. It really is Christianity light and if only they would open themselves up to the fact that there's so much more goodness, truth, and beauty if they embrace the fullness of truth in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, well, let's get into this in a bit more detail. So we have Kemi Badenoch, leader of the opposition, the unconservative Conservative Party, saying that her faith was shaken. And this is not, you begin by saying this is not an unusual thing. In fact, the problem of pain and suffering, I think, is highlighted as the number one reason why people don't have faith in God. But you begin by saying it's a question shaped by a particular way of thinking about prayer. And you've got some lovely lines in here. It's a way of thinking of God as a kind of divine vending machine, a God who responds to small everyday requests, help me pass the test, let the bus come on time, but ignores cries from the depths of human suffering. The reason people can read the article, and I hope they do, because it's very powerful and very personal, Mark, because the reason you have written this and the reason this touched you is because we read about suffering and we all suffer to some extent. But as you point out in the article, for some people, they are asked to carry a heavier cross. And indeed, you are one such person, having lost your young daughter when she was only 7 years old. She died, some time ago. And I know that's something that you and your family live with. It never leaves you. But you speak very personally, and I know it's difficult for you, but you're able to respond, and you draw on scripture and how this understanding. You can talk more about that. I'll pass over to you, but how it's not that Christ has abandoned you, but he suffers alongside. He didn't come to take away suffering, but to fill it with his presence. So let's go to your response there to her crisis of faith.
Well, so I suppose that it's difficult to know how to do this. So I suppose if I talk from my own personal experience, give you some insight into how I felt, it was the most earth-shattering thing that has ever happened in my life. And that it wasn't something that I got over or something that I'm over now or anything like that. It becomes very much a part of who and what you are. And from the very moment that the realization dawned that my daughter was dead, that's how I felt. I felt like everything had changed. My whole life and all my relationships and everything had changed. And the darkness that surrounds you is very, very hard to combat because it's all encompassing and very seductive. And all you really want to do is just to disappear off into that darkness because the light, how can the light ever penetrate the horror of what you've been through and the horror of that broken connection with someone so incredibly close to you, so deeply part of your heart. It's like you've died.
So innocent.
Well, precisely. It's absolutely horrific. So, but what I found, what my experience was that God had put an incredible amount of tiny coincidences. So like Kemi's prayers to catch the bus and stuff like that. lots of those little coincidences had been put in place before, during, and after the event that made it so that I was able to cope, and my wife, my children were able to cope. And something my parish priest said very early on was that God would find a way to turn this to his glory. And at the time, it was very difficult to hear. But I do now, looking back on it, it was 2009 we lost Ruth, and I do feel that what happened was it made me feel, the experience made me feel that there was no doubt that there was God. The opposite of what Kemi expressed in that interview, really. And that's because God held me, us, all of us, very, very definitely through the, at the point where you felt you were just hanging off the cross. He was there holding you up. He filled that space with his presence in every sense, from the people who were so incredibly supportive and came to help us through the pain and cooked for us and looked after us, the clergy that were involved in ministering to us. Even our bishop was, sort of engaged in comforting us and sending us notes. Obviously, I was studying at the time. I was involved in my theology degree, and so there was a huge community there. There were little coincidences of people that I met, lectures that I attended that were directly aimed at theological questions that I had. Where was Ruth now? What was she doing? What did she know? What didn't she know? Was she with God? Things like that. And I was given an opportunity, to really grill some of the top theologians in the country and find answers. Now, that's not necessary that might not be, but all these things, I've said before that the thing about all of these coincidences is that, sometimes if I explained all these things to you, you might say, oh, they're just little things that happen. But when those prayers are answered, and they answer the really deep longing of your heart, when those little coincidences speak directly to something that you have prayed about, then it's overwhelmingly powerful, really. It becomes a very real experience. And I'll just say that it's like living through that pain with God, is a transformative experience. So I don't know why we have to carry this cross. I don't know why I have to carry this cross, but I do know that through the whole experience, I'm much closer to God. And there's, I'd say, and I said it in the article, it's not so much that I'm convinced, or I know that there's more. I know that the faith is true, and I know that God is there looking after us, and very much a real part of our lives. So the faith takes on a whole new understanding, a whole new dimension, a whole new meaning, and becomes so much more powerful. And I suppose that's what upset me. It didn't really upset me, but sort of smacked me in the face a bit about Kemi's sort of, it seems a very offhand, facile rejection of something that if only she could see. And, what I thought was, how does she know what effect this has had on Elisabeth Fritzl? How does she know what effect those prayers had, or how they were answered? You don't know. And, it's you're putting on Elisabeth Fritzl that what she wanted was to be teleported out of the basement, and but that might not be, in those instances of prayer, the thing that she needed to keep her going. And let's look at it. She kept going, she kept going, and eventually she escaped. Now, how does she feel about family, about, all of these things? We can't really know that, can we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I won't press you on it, because I know it's very difficult for you to talk about this, and it's something that you're called on often to talk about. And in this case, it was appropriate for you to share your experiences and write in response to what Kemi had said. But I would encourage anyone who hasn't yet to go and read your article, because it's it's written so beautifully and in such detail. And as I said, you draw on instances of scripture, making exactly that point, that we can't look on from outside and say we know, that God knows. And there's a couple more lines I'll just take from it. You said, if Badenoch had said, I cannot understand why God allows this, she would have been echoing Job, whose cries of despair were heard and honoured by God, who later vindicated him. Or perhaps you could even say Christ in Gethsemane, though this was not divine dereliction, but solidarity with human suffering, the depths of which God himself enters to redeem. But instead, she seems to say, because I don't understand, God must not exist. And that is the false premise, that pain without an answer must mean pain without a purpose. So it's really beautiful to go into that question of pain, that question of suffering. And you end by saying, I write regularly about faith, suffering, and the search for meaning in a secular world. And if you've lost someone you love, please know that you are not alone. You are seen, you are heard, and you are loved by the God who sees. So this is a really important article. We write variously about politics and culture, but this is very personal, and I found it helpful. I've shared it with others who have found it helpful. So we just wanted to meet today and draw people's attention to it and say, this may be.
Talk to me a bit more.
Yeah, we just wanted to talk to Mark. I mean, you're on holiday. You might be enjoying yourself a bit too much, Mark. We can't have that. I know it's been difficult, but you've been brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing it. It really will help others.
That's all right. No, and the scripture thing, that was it. There was a couple of things really in the worst moments of it. And one was there was an album. I can't remember what the monks were called, but I just listened to it. It was just like the Divine Office and the Mass, just on a like a recording from an abbey, and I just listened to that constantly, and it kind of just the rhythm of prayer just was a way of clinging to. Like, it's so hard to explain, but it's like clinging to existence. But all those bits, I mean, I sort of alluded to a few bits. Job was really important. I kept going back to Job, and obviously the Book of Ruth. And when we saw a priest who's an old friend in London, and he immediately started talking about the Book of Ruth. But that story from Genesis, I think, is, I mean, it really does bring me to tears just hearing you say that. So that's what I was messaging you when I was writing it, saying I'm sitting here in floods of tears. But I love that bit of Hagar, that God is El Roy, the God who sees. It's such an amazing bit, even after everything that she's been through, and she knows that it's not that she's been, it's not that she's been abandoned. It's not that she's been and that is our experience, our human experience, that we do. Being a Catholic doesn't mean that you're not going to go through trauma. It doesn't mean that these things aren't going to happen to you. It's not some magic charm that's going to stop reality breaking in, because this is the world that we live in. But at the same time, it means something. And that's the difference between the Catholic faith and, the other example I was thinking in the Protestant world is like the prosperity gospel, this idea that it's like, oh, if you do this, you'll get that. And that it's not like that. Life is much more beautiful and complex, and than these sort of simplistic reductionist views
Transactional.
of what. Transactional, exactly. Yeah. So and it is beautiful. Like even in that devastating sorrow, there is something there. And obviously, from my point of view, the redemption comes with, like, we hadn't had I think it's important. I suppose it's important that we say that bit as well, that we hadn't had a child for 6 years or something, even though we've been trying and we've always been open to life. But we, as part of that grief journey, a couple of years into it, we'd been praying that we, perhaps we'll be blessed with another child, and that nothing, we were sort of nothing had happened, and then we came here. So this is somewhere I've been coming for sort of quarter of a century, unbelievably, since my oldest boys were tiny little babies. And I can remember being in the swimming pool just up the road here in the same town that I'm in now, when Lou told me that she was pregnant with Ruth. We were both in there together. So that was, a beautiful memory. So after that, we were praying just round the corner. There's a Marian shrine, Our Lady of Tarpinu. And Lou and I were both praying there. And it was the same prayer, but there was a change, I think, particularly in me, because I was, still sort of doing that Job thing and was kind of saying, why me, and I want my daughter back. And, there's something clicked inside me. I remember the feeling of just like letting go. And we came out and we were talking about it. And I just said, just like God's will be done, whatever he wants for us. And literally we got home and Lou was pregnant. And then in 2012, we were blessed with our daughter Mary. And that's a whole another story, emotional story. So I can't really do both things on the same video. But anyway,
but tune in tomorrow and
when Catherine tortures Mark more.
Yes. But that little baby is coming to join my little baby who are neither of them little babies anymore, when you fly over to join us here for a few days in France, which is lovely. Our girls are a similar age and they're good friends now. So you are a real blessing, Mark. You're very brave, you're courageous, and you're a wonderful model to others. And I'm so thankful, as I'm sure many will be, to you for writing this article, for sharing your experience, and may it be a blessing to others when they encounter it. And thank you. You're a star.
You're welcome.
So we might be able to go and not. You were in tears. You were messaging me saying, Catherine, is this all right? And then I read it, and then I was in tears, and we were both in different parts of the world sobbing on our holidays. But in some kind of there's that lovely Peter Kreeft phrase which I use often. Some curse God for putting sadness into beauty. I thank him for putting beauty into sadness, because you're going to have to suffer anyway. But you can suffer with or without Christ, and we're very, very, very blessed that we can say that we suffer with him and join ourselves to him and fall at the foot of the cross. So, yeah, right. Go and get
it's that lovely quote from Dostoevsky that I put in the thing as well, isn't it? I believe, like a child, that suffering will be healed and made up for, and that the world's finale, something so precious, will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all sorrows. And I think that's a promise I really believe in.
Well, let's all believe in that. And I hope you have a good day. Get yourself a stiff whiskey, and we'll be back. We'll be back to talk church matters and other things with Gavin, who should be back from his trip abroad very soon. So, and don't forget our live Tuesdays at 7:30 to 8:30 London time. Thank you for joining us today. Do visit catholicunscripted.com, which is where you can find that article we've been discussing today, and many others besides, as well as some exclusive videos. So visit catholicunscripted.com. Like, share and subscribe to this video. Every little helps, as Tesco says. Right, God bless. Thanks for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.